Is this book any different than Twilight? No. Maybe, but mostly no. Bella is still a valuable character, even if she's not the enlightened feminist that we in our culture tend to hold up and just... Hello there, welcome back to my channel. Today we will be discussing The Trainwreck that is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Myers. Also, we will be discussing my fears that this book might have turned me into a Twihard. If you're here, I'm assuming you have a basic understanding of the novel of Twilight, so we're going to just say that this is Twilight, but from the vampire's perspective. Is this book any different than Twilight? No. Maybe, but mostly no. I read the Twilight saga about 4.5 years ago. I've only read it all the way through once. And so these novels, the story of Twilight felt very new and fresh to me, simply because I'm just not as familiar with this world as most of the rest of the world is. I also didn't read it when it was a massive hype. I read it later with 4 of my coworkers who all read it together with me, long after all the movies had finished coming out. If you are a diehard Twilight fan, you will probably really like this book. If you found the Twilight series to be super problematic, this book is not going to change your opinion. So the length of this novel actually didn't bother me that much. I know a lot of people found that this novel was way longer than it needed to be, and I will say that the pacing of this novel was a bit slow in places. But I was pretty engaged the entire time. I listened to it on 1.25 speed, but that's what I listen to everything that I check out on. I was interested the entire time I was listening to it. I do think that if you're very familiar with this story, Midnight Sun is going to feel pretty stale to you. It's not like it's new, fresh information here. I also have heard a lot of complaints that this book makes Bella out to be nicer than she actually is in the original Twilight book. And I definitely think there's room to interpret the novel that way. But I am going to stand up for Bella here. I think what happened is that Stephanie Myers got better at conveying Bella's history, and we have a better understanding of what happened to her as a child. Is she a doormat? Absolutely. But another way of phrasing that is by adding the phrase emotional abuse or neglect, or a level of parentification. Both emotional neglect and parentification have long-term psychological effects on the children that are impacted by that. It makes them very concerned with people-pleasing, making sure that everything's in order, trying to avoid problems and fights. It makes for very responsible children who struggle to identify with people their own age, and they feel like they respond more and better to adults. We learn in this novel that Bella was essentially the parent in her mother and daughter relationship. She did most of the cooking, she did a lot of the grocery shopping, she paid the bills, she made sure that her mother was being responsible in the sense that, like, she got to her appointments, she picked up the dry cleaning. Like, Bella was the driving force behind that instead of her mother being that driving force. Bella was also really isolated. She spent a lot of time working. She didn't hang out a lot with people her own age. She doesn't identify well with people her own age, and that kind of stuff will mess you up. We also learn that her mother projects her thoughts on other people. Like, her thoughts are so loud that people feel the need to respond to that. They feel obligated to help her, which makes her a bit of a narcissist. And that would be very difficult to grow up with when you feel like you have to respond to the needs of this person that you're living with. Even if you love them and you genuinely care about them, you would feel a need to try and make things as easy as possible for them so they need less, just for your own peace of mind and safety, and just to help make life easier all around. Parentification and emotional neglect are really tough subjects to cover because they're very subtle, and it's more a lack of something than it is a physical outside form of abuse. Like, obviously Bella was as far as we know, she was never beaten, but just because her emotional needs were never fulfilled in the way that they should have been, which causes long-term damage that is harder to see on the outside. Is Bella a doormat? Yes, but it's because that's the way she was raised, and that's what she believes she has to do in order to make people happy. And no one stood up for her and defended her rights to be a child. We don't know how much Charlie is involved with his daughter, but I do feel like Charlie did have a level of responsibility to check in on his child and see, oh, well, this child of mine is doing most of the cooking and grocery shopping for my wife, or my ex-wife, I guess, who is supposed to be the one doing that for the child. I do hold Charlie a little bit responsible for not checking up on Bella in that way. Also, fun fact, children who have been parentified and emotionally neglected often find themselves in very, very abusive relationships. Enter Edward Cullen. Now, was this Stephenie Meyers trying to cover her butts for complaints about Bella's character? Maybe. Probably. Possibly. But let's not rag on Bella for not coming out of an abusive relationship and environment and screaming about how strong and empowered she is. Like, let's allow her to not have to be a fully empowered feminist coming out of an abusive relationship, and rather let her come out of that relationship and allow her to use the coping mechanisms that she's always used in the past to continue on with her future life. Like, she, in many terms, identifies what a lot of people coming out of an abusive or a neglectful environment feel when they come out of that environment. Bella is still a valuable character, even if she's not the enlightened feminist that we in our culture tend to hold up and just and that's okay. Now for the things that I wasn't as thrilled about when it comes to this novel. First, let's talk about the fact that we have a vampire who is brooding in his own head for most of the novel. Like, we do not see Edward Cullen not obsessively thinking about Bella until the 50% mark of this novel, when he has a flashback to the past when Bella literally was not alive. And also, Edward doesn't do anything except think about Bella. And I guess part of me questions, like, we have this very brooding vampire who never sleeps and only thinks about this girl, and that just doesn't feel as realistic to me, because you would get bored of brooding, I feel like. He's been alive for 104 years and he's been brooding for a lot of that time, and I feel like maybe we should give him some more hobbies to do or think about. Like, he likes to play the piano, but that's while he's thinking about Bella. He likes to listen to music and brood, but what else? I just find it unrealistic that we have this person who never sleeps and goes to high school and doesn't have any other hobbies. That's just very unhealthy, and I feel like Carlisle and Esme should have been really concerned about that. Also, people argue that the Cullens get more fleshed out in this novel, and I disagree with that. Yes, we learn more about people. Carlisle is a doctor. Rosalie works on cars. Esme designs houses. Alice likes to be an interior designer and to do things like that. Jasper and Emmett play chess. But I'm just so baffled because we have a house full of vampires who really don't do anything but one thing. Does Esme just always design houses and clean her own house? Awesome, that's a really great hobby, but also, you would get bored of that. These people are the same people, just they have a desire to drink blood. And I know I can't work on the same thing obsessively for 1,000 years. I need several hobbies to bounce around in between. So, and does she like to paint? Does she like to crochet? Does she like to garden? She never leaves the house, so what does she do to entertain herself? Does Alice only design clothes and make out with Jasper? I assume she'd have to do homework. We never actually see them doing any homework. But wouldn't Alice love to sit down in front of a TV show and see how quickly she could tell how the TV show is going to end and make bets on that? Oh, it took you 0.2 seconds. I feel like Alice would have fun with that. Where are these people's hobbies? Do they read vampire fiction and laugh hysterically about it as a family? That would be a great family time. They played baseball once. I guess part of my problem is that these characters, we didn't even really have a stereotype for them, I felt like, in Twilight. And in this book, the stereotypes are very clearly laid out, and it's up to you, the reader, to flesh them out yourself. But the thing is, people are multi-layered, multi-dimensional, and they like to do many different things that are not all in the same lane. Jasper could like cooking. He could secretly like opera. There are things about these people that they're little tiny quirks that we never find out, and so I still don't think that these characters have been fully fleshed out. I don't agree with that. I think there was a little bit of lazy writing when it came to anybody besides Bella and Edward. So I'm going to disagree with the internet on that one. And finally, we can't get out of a discussion of Twilight or Midnight Sun without discussing the creep factor. Because I feel like Stephenie Meyers tried to defend the creep factor here and help us to understand why it is Edward was stalking Bella and creeping into her room at night. And yes, we understand in vivid detail why Edward was doing those things. And in doing those, like in explaining that, she amplified the creep factor by about 1,000. It's really easy to get caught up in Edward's head because he's stuck in his own head. He's a very angsty 17-year-old vampire who's been 17 for a really long time. And like, he's a really anxious character. Like, Stephanie Myers has come out and said that he's a very anxious character. And like, very easily you could say this character is super anxious because he obsesses, he has obsessive thoughts, he spends a lot of time thinking about the same thing over and over and trying to come up with a solution for it. Like, he is very anxious. And we get a very full picture of just how terrible a time he's having as just like existing in his own mind, let alone trying to deal with all of the pressures of life. And I do have a level of sympathy for Edward having existed in his head for 600 pages. It's not a great place to be, but you know what? That doesn't matter. Lots of people have a really terrible time of life, and lots of people have a really terrible time before they commit crimes. And sometimes that terrible time is what forces them, or is the straw that pushes them into committing a terrible crime. We can be sympathetic towards the reasoning behind crimes, but that doesn't change the fact that a crime has been committed. Edward literally stalks Bella before she has any idea that they are in any sort of relationship. He watches her sleep, he listens to her talk in her sleep, he stands outside of her house listening to her move, he sits in the trees next to, but it's fine because it's not on her property. That tree's not on her property, so he's not watching her creepily because the tree is not on her property. If it was on her property, then all of a sudden the creep level, not too much. Like the scene in Twilight where she's outside reading a book, he's literally sitting in the tree watching her read, like, and watching her react, and it's so creepy. And then he watches her move through the minds of other people. He literally spies on her all the time through the minds of everyone else. And if you replace the spying on the minds with watching her through security camera footage, all of a sudden this novel becomes very, very awkward, very, very creepy. Don't want anything to do with it, even if he is really anxious about her safety and it's legitimately anxiety. Still wrong. Like, let's be clear, if my husband started watching me sleep every night, I would find that uncomfortable, and I love him. I know him. we spent very, very many happy years together, but like, I would not be okay with that. And Edward's judge of whether something is safe or appropriate is all determined by how okay with it Bella is, and whether he can convince her that it's okay. And that's not a good judge for whether something is an appropriate behavior or not. Just because Bella does have a level of consent towards being okay with Edward being around all of the time doesn't mean that it's okay for him to be around all of the time. Do not stalk people. Edward, we do not stalk people. And I feel like I don't understand why his parents, whom he talks about all the time and respects super much, are not like, bro, stop, leave the girl alone. Like, I know you're obsessed with her, and I know that you love the smell of her blood, but like, go do a new hobby. Let's do new hobbies. Make pottery. I don't know, like anything. There are lots of things you could be doing late at night while she's sleeping besides watching her sleep. All of the things. And this is the part of Midnight Sun that gets really interesting, because we have a character, Bella, who comes from a highly people-pleasing environment, and then we have Edward, who is obsessive and anxious, and they come together, and Bella tries to please Edward tries to obsess and like mold Bella into this like beautiful, perfect goddess, and then she does that because she's a people pleaser. And I feel like the fantasy of Twilight is that these two circumstances and personalities could come together and create a healthy relationship. Like, I don't feel like in real life that would be the case. There's just not enough character growth, or at least I don't remember enough character growth over the Twilight series to justify these two people who really need a lot of therapy coming together and having a healthy relationship. I think it's natural that these people would come together. Whether they stay together for an eternity as vampires, I think is a whole nother story. There's also a real power imbalance between Edward and Bella that I don't remember noticing the last time I read it, the only other time I read it. Just in the sense that like Edward physically has power over all things except the nature, and he's very intimidating, and he could kill you. So like, how do you say no to that? And especially for somebody who is a habitual habit pleaser, like that would be a little bit distressing. You wouldn't want to say no, even if you feel like you are totally on board with it. People pleasers just struggle with saying no anyway. So there is that makes me uncomfortable too, the amount of power imbalance there. Anyway, so like where does that leave me? Man, I don't know. I enjoyed this dumpster fire. Like, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I feel like there's a lot of things to discuss. There are so many things about do not stalk people that like, but like at the same time, it's really interesting to read and understand all of his reasonings onto why he, in every instance, he's stalking her, because we know every time what his reasoning is behind that. Absolutely, but still doesn't justify it. But I've also really enjoyed talking with people about this novel and listening to commentary about Twilight on YouTube. Like, I kind of love to trash it a little bit, and I also just love the universe and the characters, and I don't know what that means. I've already started rereading Twilight to read the series because I really want to see what my opinions are again, and I'm about 100 pages into Twilight, and I'm loving the cheesy, cringy YA-ness of it all. The characters take themselves so seriously, and it's just funny. And at what point do you consider somebody a Twihard? Like, is it the people who defend the Twilight series, even when it doesn't make any rational sense? Is it the people who say, I love this universe, and here are all the problems with it? I honestly thought that reading this book would cement me into never needing to read this series ever again. It would just be the final closing chapter. I would be done. I could say that I had read it. And now I feel like I want to just be more in this world, and I was not expecting that. And I don't know. I don't know, guys. I think I'm gonna reserve my opinion on whether I'm a Twihard until I finish the Twilight series. Which maybe just in saying that I'm going to continue reading the Twilight series means that I'm a Twihard. I'm not sure. There are a lot of really problematic issues, including like how the Quileute tribe is portrayed and stereotyped in these novels. Like there's a lot of problems here, but if you look at any book, there are a lot of problems. There is no such thing as a perfect book. And everything is very controversial, and everybody has an opinion on everything, and that's kind of the world we live in. And I'm still putting out feelers to see how things are, to see how things feel, and I'm also just in the mood, and maybe part of that is the reason too, is I'm in the mood for angsty high school YA dumpster fires. That's what I'm in the mood for, and so maybe that influences the reason that I'm on board with this, because I did try and read this novel 2 times, and I put it down after getting 2 chapters in because I was like, this is annoying. So I think you do have to be in the mood for a dumpster fire drama. Anyway, I will talk with you more in the comments down below and in another video. Bye!